Hello. Oh, now it works. Okay, good morning, everybody. I have our call to worship this morning. So as you guys find your spots, I wanted to just draw us back to kind of our Advent song that we sang several weeks in a row. And the lyrics, I put them up in my house over Advent, and because we just barely even got our Christmas stuff down, my words are still up. So it still says in my house, hold on a little more. This is not the end. Hope is in the Lord. Keep your eyes on him. And we had those lyrics up in our house during Advent, and for me it was a reminder to constantly realign my heart to the importance of where I put my hope. I ask myself the question, do I put my hope in health or in comfortable circumstances? Is it in completed projects or checked off to-do lists? Is it in relationships that have no conflict or pain or little? Or planning for a trip or something that I had hoped to check off on my bucket list this year? Or maybe it's a promotion or a new position, or a new job entirely. And I think we could make the list go on and on and on. But really, as we gather this morning, I want us to realign our hearts. I want us to realign our hopes. We surround ourselves with people who will encourage us not to hope in those things that I listed, or fill in the blank with whatever it is, wherever you see your heart drifting. So I'll read those words again to you. Hold on a little more. This is not the end. Hope is in the Lord. Keep your eyes on him. Our first song this morning says, "Come, rejoice now, O my soul, for his love is my reward. Fear is gone, and hope is sure. Christ is mine forevermore." So will you stand with us?
Mine are days that God has numbered. I was made to walk with him. Yet I look for a worldly treasure and forsake the King of Kings. But mine is hope in my Redeemer. Though I fall, his love is sure. For Christ has paid for everything. I am his forevermore. Mine are tears in times of sorrow, darkness not yet understood. Through the valley I must travel, where I see no earthly good. But mine is peace that flows from heaven, and the strength in times of need. I know my pain will not be wasted. Christ completes his work in me. Mine are days here as a stranger, pilgrim on a narrow way. One with Christ I will encounter, harm and hatred for his name. But mine is honor for this battle, strong enough to last the war. And he has said he will deliver, save me to the golden shore. And mine are keys to Zion city, where beside the King I walk. For there my heart has found its treasure. Christ is mine forevermore. rejoice now, O my soul, for his love is my reward. Fear is gone and hope is sure. Christ is mine forevermore. Come rejoice now, O my soul, for his love is my reward. Fear is gone and hope is sure. Christ is mine forevermore. Come rejoice now, O my soul, for his love is my reward. Fear is gone and hope is sure. Christ is mine forevermore. And mine are keys to Zion's city, where beside the King I walk. For there my heart has found its treasure. Christ is mine forevermore. Christ is mine forevermore. Christ is mine forevermore.
For our call to confession this morning, we're going to read from Psalm 88. So my apologies. Lord, you are my God who saves me. Day and night I cry out to you. May my prayer come before you. Turn your ear to my cry. I'm overwhelmed with troubles, and my life draws near to death. I'm counted among those who go down to the pit. I'm like one without strength. I am set apart from the dead, like the slain who lie in the grave, whom you remember no more, who are cut off from your care. You have put me in the lowest pit, in the darkest depths. Your wrath lies heavily upon me. You have overwhelmed me with all your waves. You have taken from me my closest friends, and have made me repulsive to them. I'm confined and cannot escape. My eyes are dim with grief. I call to you, Lord, every day. I spread out my hands to you. Do you show your wonders to the dead? Do their spirits rise up and praise you? Is your love declared in the grave, your faithfulness in destruction? Are your wonders known in the places of darkness, or your righteous deeds in the land of oblivion? But I cry to you for help, Lord. In the morning my prayer comes before you. Why, Lord, do you reject me and hide your face from me? From my youth I have suffered and am close to death. I have borne your terrors and am in despair. Your wrath has swept over me. Your terrors have destroyed me. All day long they surround me like a flood. They have completely engulfed me. You have taken from me friend and neighbor. Darkness is my closest friend. So Psalm 88 has been said to be one of the saddest psalms, whereas other psalmists, burdened and in trouble, come to see the hope and peace in the Lord. This psalm begins and ends in despair. God's love and assurance appears elusive. Apart from grace, all we have is infinite sadness, eye for eye, tooth for tooth, forever and ever. This can feel like our experience at times. Depression and sadness lasting for weeks, months, and years, seemingly unending. Moreover, our struggles often are triggered by people and things in life we credit as blessings from above. This morning, we corporately confess the times and ways we disregard God's sovereignty and look to other people, things, and experiences to relieve us of our pain, among other sins. While Scripture empathizes with our grief, permitting us to be honest and vulnerable with God and each other, Scripture in its fullness also shows us the breadth and depth of God's character. The next psalm, Psalm 89, begins, I will sing of the Lord's great love forever. With my mouth I will make your faithfulness known through all generations. And it continues, the heavens praise your wonders, Lord, your faithfulness too in the assembly of the holy ones. For who in the skies above can compare with the Lord? Who is like the Lord among the heavenly beings? In the council of the holy ones, God is greatly feared. He is more awesome than all who surround him. Who is like you, Lord God Almighty? You, Lord, are mighty, and your faithfulness surrounds you. So in the remainder of our gathering, we may remind each other about the story of which we are part, and may we be comforted by the hope and peace of Jesus' death and resurrection, the definitive act in God's promise and plan for restoration.
Everybody wants to take a seat, and we'll sing Lesser Loves together.
was a prisoner, you held the key. The door was open, you welcomed me. I was guilty of every crime, but you took my place, you did my time. I was an enemy, you made me a guest. You spread a table in the wilderness. Beside the waters, you filled my cup. How I have settled for lesser rest. How can I thank you, Lord? My broken heart you have restored. How can I thank you, Lord? You give me grace I cannot afford. Was an orphan, you called me a child. I was a stranger, was lost and defied. Redemption found me from up above. How I have settled for lesser love. How I have settled for lesser love. How can I thank you, Lord? My broken heart you have restored. How can I thank you, Lord? You give me grace I cannot afford. How can I thank you, Lord? My broken heart you have restored. How can I thank you, Lord? You give me grace I cannot afford. You give me grace I cannot afford.
Today's scripture reading comes from Nehemiah 4:1-6. When Sanballat heard that we were building the wall, he became angry and raged. He mocked the Jews, saying in the presence of his associates and the army of Samaria, "What are those feeble Jews doing? Will they restore the things themselves? Will they offer sacrifices? Will they finish it in a day? Will they receive the stones from the piles of rubble, even though they are burnt?" Tobiah, the Ammonite, who was beside him, added, "Even if a fox climbs on whatever they build, their wall of stones will crumble." Listen, God, we are despised. Turn their insults to us back on their heads and make them like a plunder in a captive land. Don't forgive their iniquity or block out their sins from your sight. They have thrown the insults at the builders. We continued to build the wall. All of it was joined together, and it reached half of its intended height because of the people were eager to work. This is the word of the Lord.
Thanks be to God.
Morning. Am I turned on? I am. All right. Let me get set up here. If you have your Bibles, if you want to turn them to Nehemiah 3. Nehemiah 3 and 4 is where we're going to be today. Ella, just be glad I didn't have you do Nehemiah 3 because it's just a ton of names. It's just all names. We'll talk about that a little bit. But go ahead and turn your Bibles to Nehemiah 3. Bobby preached for us last week, Nehemiah 1 and 2. And one of the things that came across, and I wholeheartedly agree with him in this, is that it's hard to like get into the passage and get something out of it, right? Like what am I supposed to do with this? Here's the story, and I don't know if they're actually even supposed to be building the wall in the first place. So where do we go with this? And that's the challenge when we're reading a lot of the narrative literature. So I'm gonna go into Nehemiah 3 and 4. I've got a few things that I think we can take away from it, and I hope that maybe you'll leave here encouraged. I don't know what that is. That's weird. But let's do some review from where we've been. And let me give you our big idea. Our big idea is this. Our current circumstances are not indicators of God's favor or disfavor towards us. Our current circumstances are not indicators of God's favor or disfavor towards us. And I think, we didn't coordinate this, but I think Val and Mark really connected to what I want to get at today really well. As I was reading this, what I love about Nehemiah here, he's actually really good at this. I can see why people develop all kinds of leadership principles, and when you go to Nehemiah, it's all about leadership and organization and all of that. I can see why. Like, Nehemiah is impressive, all right? But we know how the book ends. We know where it ends up, and we know, like, at the end of this, unlike Ezra, who goes around pulling his hair out at the people, Nehemiah actually goes around pulling everybody else's hair out. And what came to mind, I don't know if you guys grew up listening to Linkin Park at all, but their one hit song was what? I tried so hard and got so far, but in the end, what? It doesn't even matter. I tried so hard and got so far, but in the end, it doesn't even matter. And here we're in a passage where, man, they are working hard. They are accomplishing, it's impressive what Nehemiah pulls off and what he pulls together. But in the end, doesn't even matter. In the end, Nehemiah's going to go out pulling everybody's hair out. And we feel like that a lot. Chester Bennington, the lead singer of Linkin Park, felt that way a lot. And unfortunately, he struggled with depression and alcoholism and addiction, and it took his life eventually. He tried so hard and got so far, but in the end, it doesn't even matter. We feel that a lot. So I want to talk through that. I want to talk about, if we feel that so often, like Val said, what is our hope in then? And like Mark was talking about, so often when things aren't going well, here's David, or the psalmist, whoever the psalmist of Psalm 88 is, he's crying out to God, and things are not going well. He ends the psalm with, darkness is my only friend, which I wonder if Paul Simon was reading the Psalms when he was doing his songwriting, when he sings, right, hello darkness, my old friend. But what does he say in the middle of the psalm? He says, your wrath lies upon me. It feels like nothing's going right, and your wrath, I'm interpreting this at, God, you must be angry at me for some reason, right? I want to talk about that. Our current circumstances are not indicators of God's favor or disfavor towards us. So let's review. Okay, I know this is kind of hard to read, so I'm going to read it for you. As a piece of literature, Ezra and Nehemiah is a very impressive piece of literature, okay? Whatever we believe about who wrote it, how it was written, how it came to us, whether or not we should follow Ezra and Nehemiah's example, whether Nehemiah should have built the wall. I'm with Bobby here. We interpret Scripture with Scripture, and Ezra and Nehemiah is bookended by Ruth and Esther, and we have the story of Jonah. We have the prophet Zechariah and Amos, who are contemporary there. If they saw themselves as the fulfillment of all these prophecies, if Ezra's a new Moses and Nehemiah, I'm going to try to show you Nehemiah's like a new Joshua, if they see themselves as the fulfillment of these prophecies, then we would expect them to be welcoming all nations in, because that's what the prophecy said would happen, and that's where Zechariah, the prophet of the time, is criticizing them, right? Okay, so I think I agree with Bobby that maybe Nehemiah, in building the wall, was that really what God wanted him to do at that time and place? Nehemiah, he had tons of passion. I love that. He's very, very good at what he does. And it sets him up as a new Joshua. And we can see why. So here's, let's kind of review where we've been. There's this repeated structure throughout Ezra and Nehemiah, where we've got three major sections, and then we're going to get like to Nehemiah 8 through 13, where it kind of wraps up in revival and then disappointment. But God providentially leads a Persian king to allow the Israelites to return and rebuild. With Ezra, it was Cyrus, then it was Artaxerxes, then again Nehemiah goes to Artaxerxes, and he is sent to build Jerusalem. They face opposition, right? In Ezra 4, the enemies of Judah were approaching. In Ezra 9, what's the problem? The problem is that they've intermarried with the people around them, and they feel like, man, we have not followed God's laws. Here, Ella read for us. Is Ella in here? Sanballat and Tobiah, we were joking about the pronunciation of that, and I told her I would pronounce it however she said it, but then she said it weird. Sanballat and Tobiah oppose the rebuilding. Ella read that for us this morning. Like here, they're rebuilding, and Sanballat and Tobiah are just coming along, and in that section, they're just making fun of them. Like, what are you going to do? Like, rebuild this? Really? You know, you're going to take all these stones. What are you going to do? Make these stones live? That's literally what they're saying. Are you going to revive these stones? Are you going to make these stones alive in order to put them into a structure? And you wonder if Peter has been reading Nehemiah when he talks about Christ has put us together as what? Living stones. Like he has revived us into living stones, and now we are, I don't know. But you see that language, right? They're using that as insults. Are you going to make these stones alive? And then Peter takes it and says, hey, guess what? You guys are those living stones. They oppose rebuilding. They're making fun of them. Like even if a fox climbs on that, it's going to fall down. Like you think that's going to protect you? It won't even keep out the foxes. And then the opposition is overcome, or seemingly overcome. I don't want to say like it was actually overcome. Darius restarts the building, right? In that first section, their building project got shut down, and then they appealed to the king and were like, go to the archives, you'll see, like, the Cyrus actually said this, and they go to the archives, and they find it, and they're like, oh, okay, yeah, Cyrus did say it, okay, go ahead and keep rebuilding, right? Darius restarts the building in Ezra 5 and 6. Ezra 10, I think it was Shechaniah came to Ezra and he's like, I've got the solution to all the intermarriage. Let's just have anybody who intermarried get divorced and send off their wives and children. And that's how they overcame that opposition. Here, Nehemiah is going to overcome this opposition. He thinks that they're vulnerable, that Sanballat and Tobiah maybe will attack them. And Sanballat and Tobiah even allude to, hey, we're going to come when you least expect it. It's going to be a surprise attack. And so everybody has to work, with a trowel and a sword, right? And be ready for those attacks. Nehemiah arms the building part, and then there's going to be an anticlimactic resolution that we're going to see towards the end of this section. Okay, so there's that parallelism, and where we find ourselves in the book, we're in this third section. We're in that last parallel section. All right, there's even more to this. There's more literary elements that go in, inside of this parallelism. This is probably even harder to see. But this was fascinating. If you take Nehemiah 1 through 7 and you start reading through it, it's set up, I'm going to forget the word for this. Any scholars remember the word for this? A chiasm, yeah, where it's parallel, like as you're telling the story, you tell the story and then it unfolds in reverse, right? And at the center, there's something that joins the pieces together to show. So the idea, and you can go and Tim Mackey from the Bible Project, if you watch any Bible Project videos, you know his voice, or you listen to any podcasts, like his voice is very distinctive. He actually did like a 5-hour seminar on Ezra Nehemiah for Doxa Church, which is, if you're familiar with Soma, Jeff Vanderstelt, who started the Soma Network, that's his church, right? So Tim Mackey talks for 4 or 5 hours about Ezra Nehemiah. And if you're familiar with the Bible Project, this is the kind of stuff they geek out on, right? When you read this, if you're reading this in Hebrew, if you're a Jewish person reading this in Hebrew, you're just kind of reading the story, and then like towards the middle, you start to realize, oh, we keep having these repeated statements of people hearing a report and then forming opposition, right? You see that here. Oh, it doesn't do it on there. Oh, of course. C, Sanballat and Tobiah hear and oppose Nehemiah. And it goes every other as you move towards the center, right? So C, E, Sanballat, Tobiah, and Geshem charge Nehemiah with rebellion. G, Sanballat and Tobiah mock and oppose the rebuilding. And then if you start from the bottom, C, enemies hear and oppose Nehemiah. E, Sanballat and Tobiah and Geshem charge Nehemiah with rebellion. G, enemies mock and oppose the rebuilding. So it's every other as you work towards the center. So if you're reading this, you're like, oh, there's this repeated thing where the enemies are hearing and opposing. That's interesting. And then you get to the middle and it uses this really weird Hebrew word that means join, but it's not used barely anywhere else. And so you're like, oh, the walls are joined together. Why would he choose that word? And then immediately after that, Sanballat, Tobiah, and company joined together in opposition. Why would he use this weird, and then you like keep reading, and you're like, oh, wait, it's following this pattern. And then the idea is like once you figure out the pattern, you go back and keep rereading it, and you see it with the pattern. What is the pattern supposed to do? One, it sets it apart as the single unit. Okay, it sets it apart as the single unit. So we're supposed to read Nehemiah 1 through 7 as one unit or one story. Okay, there's a lot like Ezra and Nehemiah are supposedly one writing, or we're not supposed to separate them. In our Bibles, they're separate books. In the original, they're just one story. So it's taking this section, 1 through 7, and it's saying this is one story element. You should read this as such. There's a couple other interesting things that it does, too. There are 7 statements about the opposition hearing and opposing, right? So if you go through this, there's 7 statements about hearing and opposing, and the language that's used is almost exactly the same, both in form and number. If you read through Joshua and you read about the Canaanites, they hear about the people of Israel and they oppose them, and it happens 7 times, and it's using this. So whoever wrote Nehemiah, when they set this up, if you're familiar with the writings of Joshua, you're supposed to hear that and say, oh man, this sounds a lot like the original conquest and them coming into the land. Nehemiah over and over is set up as a new Joshua. He's a student of the Torah. He activates Moses' promise of restoration on the other side of exile. There's these 7 opposition reports that you can see there in Joshua 5, 9, 10, and 11. We have the exact same opposition reports. Nehemiah has this moment in this passage where he ascends the city walls with horns ready to blast, and he announces that our God will fight for us. Tim Mackey calls it this is the Braveheart moment for Nehemiah, right? And he is practically quoting the words of Joshua and of Deuteronomy, talking about like, our God fought for us. Our God is fighting for us. Nehemiah 4:14, which talks about do not be afraid of them. Remember the Lord who is great and awesome, and fight for your brothers, your sons, your daughters, your wives, and your homes. This is the Braveheart moment. Fight for your family. Fight for your homes. It's directly referencing elements of Joshua and Deuteronomy. If we are reading this with a Hebrew background, if we're reading this in Hebrew and we know about the story of Exodus and Joshua and all of that, we're supposed to come away from this saying, man, there's a lot of parallels here. If you remember, we talked about Ezra is constructed as the new Moses. There's all these things where, the way that he led the people out of Persia mirrors the way that Moses led the people out of Egypt. And Ezra is set up as a new Moses. Nehemiah here is set up as a new Joshua. Even like Isaiah 40, one of the major prophecies about the return and the reestablishment of the land says, "Comfort, comfort my people, says your God. Speak compassionately to Jerusalem. Proclaim to her that her compulsory service has ended, that her penalty has been paid, that she has received from the Lord's hand double for all her sins." A voice is crying out, "Clear the Lord's way in the desert. Make a level highway in the wilderness for our God. Every valley will be raised up, every mountain and hill will be flattened. Uneven ground will become level, and rough terrain a valley plain. The Lord's glory will appear, and all humanity will see it together. The Lord's mouth has commanded." This prophecy about the reestablishment of the people of God, that when Ezra's leaving Persia, one of the things that he does is he quotes this and he prays that God would make our way straight. In other words, it's exactly the same words as "make a level highway in the wilderness for our God." He is quoting Isaiah because he sees himself as a fulfillment here. This passage starts out with "comfort, comfort my people." And do you know what Nehemiah's name means? If we read it correctly, like with the Hebrew, it's really Nehemiah. And like the ending Yah is referencing Yahweh. Nehemiah's name in Hebrew actually means the comfort of Yahweh, or Yahweh comforts. Okay, so here Ezra has led the people back. They see themselves as fulfillments of Isaiah and Jeremiah's prophecy. Isaiah prophesies, "Comfort, comfort my people." They're returning to the land. And who is it that's going to lead that effort? The man whose name literally means Yahweh comforts. Okay? Do you see how they, like in their writings, they view themselves as the fulfillment of these prophecies? Okay? That's how it's set up. That's how it's structured. If we were to read this with Hebrew ears and Hebrew eyes, with the knowledge of the Old Testament, we would immediately go back and say, man, this is another Joshua. This is another Joshua story following on the heels of another Moses story. All right. That's who Nehemiah is. So what does it actually say in our passage? I want to spend a little bit of time just talking through, what is the passage actually? If you're there in chapter 3, it's talking in chapter 3 about the actual work of rebuilding the wall. Okay? This is probably hard to see, especially if you're in the back, but let me kind of walk you through a little bit of this. It's on its side, so I can make it bigger. This left side is actually north. Okay, so if you read the passage in Nehemiah 3, and you start over here at the sheep gate, that's like the top left on this map. It talks about Eliashib, the high priest, rose up with his brothers, the priests, and they built the sheep gate. They consecrated it, set its doors. They consecrated as far as the Tower of the Hundred, as far as the Tower of Hananel. And next to them, the men of Jericho built. Next to them, Zachar, the son of Imri, built. The sons of Hassanah, and they built the fish gate, right? So if you followed around, there's the sheep gate, top left, then bottom right, there's the fish gate. Then the old city gate. It might say something different in your Bible, depending on the version. But the word there means old city. And then you followed around to the valley gate, to the dung gate, to the fountain gate, to the water gate, to the horse gate, to the east gate, to the inspection gate. And then at the end of chapter 3, you get all the way back to the sheep gate. And it talks about them finishing up the sheep gate. Okay, so chapter 3 is just, here's all of the people all the way around that are working on these different parts of the wall. And if you're just reading it, like it's kind of boring. There's just a list of names, and we don't always have the ability to read these kinds of names and take a lot out of them. We talked in Ezra, like there's this list of names, and it just seems like a list of names. But if you actually know Jewish history, if you're a scholar of Jewish history, you recognize, man, this is set up as, another chiasm where the genealogy is set up to connect Ezra to the first, to the priest who, I think it was Hananiah, who consecrated the original Temple of Solomon, and it connects him back to Aaron, the original Levite, right? It's just a list of names to us, but like if we actually knew about Hebrew scholarship, we would say, oh man, like here's what this list of names is doing. What this list of names is doing, it's supposed to impress us with the number and the type of people that are involved in the work. Okay? What we see here are priests and nobles working alongside laborers and craftsmen and everybody. And there's even like one family who so-and-so's daughters, joined in with the work here. And we're supposed to read this and be like, holy cow, how did Nehemiah pull off this kind of effort to get this disparity of people working together for a common cause? All right? If you read Nehemiah 3 and you understand like all the terms and all the people, it's really impressive that, and it even calls out like at one point, the Tekoites, but none of their nobles would participate, but other nobles did, and you like it's really, when I say Nehemiah is an impressive individual, like he really is. He got these people working together. Despite class, despite economic situation, like everybody is working together to build this wall. That's really impressive. I can see why you come to Nehemiah and walk away with a lot of leadership principles, because here in chapter 3, it's really cool what he does. And so chapter 3 is just the list all the way around, counterclockwise, around the walls. Here's who's doing what. And we walk away saying, man, that's really cool that Nehemiah was able to get all of these people to work on the wall. All right, chapter 4, we get to the opposition. Okay, and we see over and over, here's the opposition, and it's set up in the chiasm, so every other phrase or element of the story is, you're going to see the word heard and opposed over and over again, right? So chapter 4, verse 1, now when Sanballat heard, he was angry and greatly enraged, and he jeered at the Jews. So you hear, you oppose, right? Verse 7, Sanballat and Tobiah and the Arabs and the Ammonites and the Ashdodites heard that the repairing of the walls and was going forward, blah, 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 and they were very angry, and they all plotted together to come fight against it. Okay, so over and over again, you get this, Sanballat heard and Tobiah heard, and they opposed. So we're at G in this point of the passage. Sanballat and Tobiah mock and oppose rebuilding, chapter 4, verse 1. Nehemiah has this prayer for vindication. He's saying, and this is what Ella read for us this morning, right? Let their insults be put back onto their head. Don't withhold your wrath from them. And we get to verse 6, right there in the middle of the chiasm. The center of the story is what? The walls are joined together at half height. They actually accomplished it. They got the walls all the way around the city, and they joined it together at half the height of what it originally was. All right? They had a huge project, very impressive, in spite of the opposition, in spite of I don't know if you've ever had to manage a project, but most of the time, it's not like people outside of your project that are causing problems with it. It's people inside the project. Some of you kids have done group projects, right? I talk to my kids about school and their group projects, and it's so-and-so's not doing anything. I need them to do this. I'm just going to end up doing it because, we've all been there. It's very impressive that Nehemiah gets them all together. And verse 6, they actually joined the walls all the way around. But what's at the center with it? That opposition is still there. Like, they accomplished their purpose, the opposition is still there. Sanballat and Tobiah company joined together in opposition. Like, they made fun of him, like, you're never going to be able to build the wall. Nehemiah prays, and then they actually finish the wall. And that makes Sanballat and Tobiah even madder. Verse 7, when Sanballat and Tobiah and the Arabs, the Ammonites, the Ashdodites heard that the repairing of the walls of Jerusalem was going forward, that the breaches were beginning to be closed, they were very angry, and they plotted together to come and fight against Jerusalem to cause confusion in it. And we prayed to our God and set a guard as a protection against them day and night. Right? Verse 9, prayers for protection. Then verse 10, in Judah it was said, the strength of those who bear the burdens is failing. There is too much rubble. By ourselves we will not be able to rebuild the wall. And our enemies said, they will not know or see till we come among them and kill them and stop the work. In other words, they're plotting a surprise attack. Verse 12, at that time the Jews who lived near them came from all directions and said to us, you must return to us. So in the lowest parts of the space behind the wall, in open places, I stationed the people by their clans with their swords, their spears, their bows. And I looked and arose and said to the nobles, to the officials, and the rest of the people, do not be afraid of them. Remember the Lord who is great and awesome, and fight for your brothers, your sons, your daughters, your wives, and your homes. Then again, verse 15, when our enemies heard that it was known to us and that God had frustrated their plan, we all returned to the wall, each to his work. From that day on, half of my servants worked on construction, half held the spears, shields, bows, and coats of mail, and the leaders stood behind the whole house of Judah who were building on the wall. All right, so Nehemiah is organizing this whole thing. We've got, there's threats of surprise attacks. Here's how we're going to mitigate it. Here's how we're going to defend ourselves. And they continued laboring at their work. Half of them held the spears from the break of dawn till the stars come out. I also said to the people at the time, let every man and his servant pass the night within Jerusalem, that they may be a guard for us by night and may labor by day. So neither I nor my brothers nor my servants nor the men of the guard who followed me, none of us took off our clothes. Each kept his weapon at his right hand. One of the really impressive things about Nehemiah, and if you want to take away leadership principles from Nehemiah, one of the biggest ones is Nehemiah is participating here. Fully participating in the work that's going on, right? Just recently we had Vladimir Zelensky, the Ukrainian prime minister, who, wherever he goes, he's wearing military clothes, and he's on the front lines with the soldiers, and he's in the mix, and he's not speaking from a bunker somewhere. That's what Nehemiah was doing. He's there on the front lines. As we go further into Nehemiah, it's also going to talk about how Nehemiah could have taken advantage of the governor's support and taken money and food and all of that. And he says, I don't want that. Use it to feed the people. I don't need that. I'm going to eat what the people eat. I'm going to work how the people are working. I'm going to be one of the men with the coats of mail, with a sword, and I'm going to stand guard with them, right? If you want to take away leadership principles from Nehemiah, here's a great one. Right? As leaders, we are in the work with people. We are not leading from above and telling people what to do. We are doing the work and inviting people to come along with us. Right? And that's what Nehemiah does here. All right. That's the passage that we're covering today. And there's going to be more. We're going to see more opposition. We're going to see more work of Nehemiah. And then eventually we're going to get to the end of the book. There's going to be a revival, and then Nehemiah's going to come back and pull everybody's hair out because it just didn't work. Right? But Nehemiah really seems to be a great leader. If we wanted somebody to, actually do a building project for it, and again, this is kind of a running joke, right? Everybody goes to Nehemiah for when they want to do a building project or something like that, right? But legitimately, if you wanted to do a project like that, Nehemiah is the kind of guy that you want running it. He seems to be a really good leader, and he's working very hard, and it feels like at times they're accomplishing things, but we know that in the end, it's all going to kind of fall apart. I tried so hard and I got so far, but in the end, it doesn't really matter, right? We feel that. He worked really hard at it. And I think we tend to feel the same way. There's a lot of times where we measure our successes the wrong way. We view God's favor or disfavor on us based on our circumstances, like whether things go right or wrong. we measure ourselves on the wrong metric. So to go back to our big idea, our current circumstances are not indicators of God's favor or disfavor towards us. At the end of Nehemiah, everything kind of falls apart. Does that mean that like everything that Nehemiah did was bad? Does it mean that like Nehemiah actually wasn't a good leader? It doesn't seem like that, right? It really seems like Nehemiah is a passionate guy doing good work, doing impressive work, and yet it still kind of falls apart in the end. So I want to ask you, like, have you ever felt that way? Have you ever like worked really, really hard at something and felt like, man, this is really important, and then it just falls apart in the end? And I'm guessing if you've been around a while, like even if you haven't been around, even the teens, I bet some of you will understand that. Like, I worked really hard on this assignment, and I thought it was really good, and I turned it in, and man, the teacher just hated it. Or I worked really hard at this sport, but I didn't make the team that I wanted, or we lost the game. Like we worked really hard, and it felt like in the end I didn't get what I wanted. If you're an employee, if you've worked for a while, like I remember working in education and like pouring my blood, sweat, and tears into it, ultimately to like get fired in the end. And it's like, what was all of that for? I thought I was doing good work, and I put all of my energy and effort into it, and in the end, did it matter at all? Like, how have you experienced that? What are ways that you've felt that? Oh, here we go. Anybody have like an example, Julie?
In my work with Graceful, we talk about this a lot, especially like as a leadership team, and when you're caring for the most vulnerable, you have to have different measures of success. And I think especially in America, we think a measure of success would be somebody getting a home and getting a job and living a happy life. And I found myself reminded of that last summer when my friend Meg died. Like we had poured so much into her and seen so much like growth in those kind of measurements, and then for her to die, I really had to sit with that and say, like, what was it all about? And I come back so often to the relationship, I think, in what we do, and caring for people and having a meaningful relationship. And so many of them I learn about their very strong faith in God through difficult circumstances. And so I do think a lot of like, what is it all about? What are we actually trying to accomplish? And it's cloudy sometimes. It feels that way.
Yeah. And when you face that disappointment and failure, do you think Jesus is disappointed with you?
No, I mean, I just see that he sat with the same sort of people.
Yeah. Anybody else? Mike?
I got I would maybe positive one. This is just more like a reality. It's sometimes in my job, it's like a grind, and like it's just rinse and repeat over and over and over and over again. People always create more trash, and I make it disappear. And there's just probably 6-8 months ago, I can't remember now exactly, but one of our guys had worked there for like 40-something years, and he had cancer, and he didn't know about it. And just one day didn't show up, and he died, you know, and so they had a quick little, they talked about it, and then you just had to like, okay, now it's time to go to work.
Yeah.
And it's just that reality. I mean, that's why I say it's not positive, because the reality where you're like, I'm just going to be replaced so fast because people need their trash picked up, and we give a moment of silence and then we move on, you know.
Yeah.
And that kind of makes that despair sometimes and makes the grind not too fun.
Yeah.
But it's also makes it's made me look for a relationship along my route. You know, people to talk to, people to just like where we have just human interactions, and little kids that I get to honk the horn for, and you know, things like that, where you're like, okay, I'm not just a cog in a wheel. I am God's light, you know, and every day has opportunity, even if it does seem like the same old thing.
Yeah. That's a really good example of, like, when I talk about, so often we measure like our success, or we measure God's favor towards us in the wrong ways. A lot of times it feels like, well, you know, he died, he's got replaced, like nothing, you know, like God, where is God? Like, is God angry with us? Like the psalmist in that what Mark read, man, God's wrath must be laying upon us, right? Because we take our circumstances, we interpret them as, you know, God's favor or disfavor. We saw this a lot recently. I don't know if you were watching Monday Night Football a couple weeks ago, but Damar Hamlin on the Bills, right? He goes down, and his heart stops, and it's terrifying. Like I've never seen anything like that on a football field. And me and Lige were watching the game, and just sat there like, what in the world is happening? And you know the story, like they got his heart restarted, they got him to the hospital, they got him on the ventilator. Like, Don, this is like exactly, I mean, I was telling Lige, like, this is exactly what happened. Like, they're doing the hypothermia protocol, and now, you know, but everybody's praying, everybody's like, oh, you know, God's in this because he was saying, and then the next football game, what happens on the opening kickoff, right? The Bills return it for a touchdown, and everybody's like, oh, this is the sign of God's favor. Like, God is in this. And I really struggle with that, because here we have this idea of a God who is very concerned with the minutia of multimillionaires playing a game on teams owned by billionaires. But Mike's coworker fell over, you know, died of cancer, and nobody cared. Like, do we want a God that's very, very concerned about the NFL, but doesn't really care about, like, the people grinding it out day by day, a lot of them in poverty? Like, does he care about our homeless friends? Like, is that our theology? So, and that's what led me, like, when we talk about, like, how do we get something out of Nehemiah? Man, this has just been, like, what kind of God are we believing in? Are we formed? Like, I love that Josh Allen, now the Bills quarterback, is talking about his faith, and, like, that's great. At the same time, like, I wonder about the person who has been fighting disease or cancer or poverty or oppression or whatever, and looking at that and saying, like, man, why does God care about the millionaires but not about me? Like, Tim Tebow had his 316 game. I don't know if you guys remember, like, against the Pittsburgh Steelers, right? He threw for 316 yards, and it was 3.16 yards per throw, and it was 3 years after he wore John 3:16 in his eye black. And like, I'll be honest, I don't know if I can get behind a God that really, really cares about millionaire football players, but then feels so absent when we're working with, you know, the homeless and foster families and, you know, single mothers on the verge of homelessness. And it's like, where is God there? Like, your circumstances, your current circumstances are not indicators of God's favor or disfavor towards you. Like, if you feel like you've been toiling away and no one's paying attention, like, me getting fired wasn't an indicator that God was angry with me. And if you read the Psalms over and over again, they come to that, like, my God, you must be really angry with me. And then eventually they come around to, man, I went into the house of the Lord, or I entered into the assembly of the Lord, and yeah, I can see that God is not done with me. I can see that God is still at work. I can see that, like these relationships that we form, actually, like both of you in your stories, what is it that we take out of it? It was like, yeah, the relationships do matter. Even if they don't produce what we want, even if they don't like turn out the way we're hoping, like the way we love each other, actually, it does matter. Like when we, I want to go back to Chester Bennington and tell him, like, no, the work that you did matter. Like when you're singing that, like all the work that you put in this relationship, it did matter. But so often we have this view of God where we measure our success or failure. We measure God's favor or disfavor based on how things are going for us. And if Nehemiah was going to do that, like it seems like God's favor is with him because they finished the wall, but then it feels like maybe God's against him because it doesn't work out in the end. Right? But Jesus is the hero of all this because Nehemiah wasn't the comforter who was going to come and comfort the people. Right? He's set up that way in the story, and it's almost like, here's the comforter, and then it doesn't work, so we need a better comforter. If you read Nehemiah, I hope you walk away with the idea that there's a better comforter that's going to come. Nehemiah is not, like he did great work, and yeah, it's very impressive, but he's not the comforter that's going to come and comfort my people. Jesus is a better comforter. He welcomes us into his assembly. And he gives us the Holy Spirit as the comforter, right? When I leave, the comforter will come and he will lead you in all truth, right? He will actually be the one to help you go out and live out the kingdom. We're not like, we walk away from Nehemiah and, man, aren't you glad that we live on this side of the cross where we can point directly to a better comforter and say, the pressure's not on me. Can you imagine being Nehemiah? Like, I'm the next Joshua. Man, I couldn't live up to that. Like, we're reading this book about his story thousands of years later, and we're nitpicking him. Like, I feel bad for him a little bit. We live on this side of the cross where we can say, like, Nehemiah did great things, but he wasn't the actual comforter. And we have the real comforter. We have the one, we are filled with the comforter to go out and live out the kingdom. And like Nehemiah, we're going to mess it up sometimes. And it's not going to go the way we expect it all the time. But that is not an indicator of God's favor or disfavor, because God's favor is on us at all times. You don't have to earn God's favor. You don't have to do anything for it. You get to live out of the fact that God's favor is already upon you. Because you're full of the comforter. And so we go out and we live out his kingdom because he settled the problem of sin once and for all. So now we don't have to worry about, are we in the assembly or not? Jesus brings us into his assembly. He gives us the comforter, and he says, now you get to go out and you get to be my messengers of the kingdom. And so we're going to do that today. We're going to be reminded of that fact with communion. Let's say our call to communion. As we come to the table, we profess this mystery of faith. Christ has died. Christ is risen. Christ will come again. Welcome to the table. Please grab your kids and then take the bread and the cup.
As you're coming back in, would you go ahead and stand and we'll sing together before the throne of God above. Jesus is that comforter who stands and is always ministering that love to us. We're going to sing about that.
For the throne of God above, I have a strong and perfect plea, a great high priest whose name is love, whoever lives and pleads for me.
My name is graven on his hands, my name is written on his heart. I know that while in heaven he stands, no tongue can bid me thence depart. No tongue can bid me thence depart. When Satan tempts me to despair and tells me of the guilt within, upward I look and see him there, who made an end to all my sin. Because the sinless Savior died, my sinful soul is counted free. For God the just is satisfied to look on him and pardon me. To look on him and pardon me. Behold him there, the risen Lamb, my perfect, spotless righteousness. Unknown, unchangeable I am, the King of glory and of grace. One with himself I cannot die, my soul is purchased with his blood. My life is hid with Christ on high, my Christ, my Savior and my God. With Christ my Savior and my God. Firm a foundation, ye saints of the Lord, is laid for your faith in his excellent word. What more can he say than to you he has said? To you who for refuge to Jesus hath fled. Fear not, I am with thee, oh be not dismayed, for I am thy God, and will still give thee aid. I'll strengthen thee, help thee, and cause thee to stand, upheld by my righteous omnipotent hand. And through the deep waters I call thee to go. The rivers of sorrow shall not overflow. For I will be with thee, thy troubles to bless and sanctify to thee thy deepest distress. For I will be with thee, thy troubles to bless and sanctify to thee thy deepest distress. The soul that on Jesus hath leaned for repose, I will not desert to his foes. That soul all hell should endeavor to shake, I'll never, no, never forsake.
All right. Not a lot of announcements. Youth discipleship is next week. So we're looking forward to that. Winter gloves, if you have any extra winter gloves. I know Graceful is working on collecting those. Just connect with Julie if you've got some that you'd be willing to donate. For our benediction, I talk a lot about how firm a foundation and what it means to me. So, Bob, if you wouldn't mind going back to that last verse of how firm a foundation. And when we talk about wondering if we have God's favor or disfavor, this is what Jesus is saying to us, right? That soul though all hell should endeavor to shake, I will never forsake you. So let's raise our right hands. And it says this, the next one, sorry. Fear not, I am with thee. Oh, be not dismayed, for I am thy God and will still give thee aid. I'll strengthen thee, help thee, and cause thee to stand, upheld by my righteous, omnipotent hand. Grace and peace be with you. You're dismissed.